Welcome to the Friday edition of the Bradshaw Chronicles. I am your host, Bryan Lee Whatley. Tonight's special guest is Zack Daggy. Zack is an internet DJ, new media entrepreneur, and the creator of a number of original programs. Zack is dubbed the Mothman because of his late night habits. He's passionate about the indie music scene and presents the best and brightest talents that the music industry has to offer on the Mothpod. Since August of 2006, Zack has featured bands and artists from both near and far, established and emerging, signed and unsigned. Zack has also produced nearly a dozen distinct shows, including the Mothpod and Midnight Spook Show, and is also the author of Dark Worlds, an original horror trilogy of novels. The book we are discussing tonight is Blood, Sex, and Psychos, a guide to slasher and torture cinema. Zack likes to say that although he's required the use of a wheelchair his entire life, it has never slowed him down. In fact, just try to keep up. Our musical guest tonight is Girl in the Middle. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the Friday edition.
Welcome, Zack. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's awesome to have you here. I've been doing a lot of research on you, and I'm going to have to tell you, you're an amazing person to talk to for all the stuff that you've been able to accomplish over the time. You've gotten a couple of awards for your work, your websites that you have going on. You're a book author. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff that you're doing. I'm just really impressed. So congratulations on all the success that you've been having.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I try.
So can you tell me and our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the horror movies and the whole horror genre?
Pretty much, I've just grown up addicted to the horror genre. I mean, I mentioned in the book that I just released of Blood, Sex, and Psychos that, one of my first toys I ever had was an Etch-a-Sketch with the Universal Monsters stickers on it. And so, I mean, from that, I grew up reading Goosebump books, Ghostbusters. I was obsessed with Ghostbusters.
I love Ghostbusters. I met Ernie Hudson, by the way. It's the guy that's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, I came close to meeting him once. I was at a convention, but he wasn't at the booth when I went up to it, so. I mean, Ghostbusters, as far as I'm concerned, is the best film of the 80s. I love that, and I just really, from reading Goosebump books in particular, I really started getting into the idea of writing horror stories. And so, I mean, I was like 7 years old and writing like a 900-page long story called Ghost Dog. And I don't remember all the details, so I know it had something to do with an unmarked grave in this house and a dog that stood guard over it. And I was writing twisted stuff at age 7. From there, the idea for Dark Worlds, which is my first novel, I started writing it as kind of some short stories I was going to put together as like a collection, and then it kind of took a life of itself. Next thing I knew, I was writing a horror novel, and that kind of thrust me professionally into the horror genre. And from there, right now, part of that novel is being turned into a short film. I started a podcast called Midnight Spook Show, which I just kind of put together as a talk show to talk about the horror genre and the latest happenings in that. And I started getting kind of a fan base from that, and from there I decided that I'd kind of take the basis of Midnight Spook Show and kind of put it in book form, and kind of, instead of just giving you the latest news, I kind of go back and go over the history of the genre. And so that's where this kind of first book in a series I'm writing of a guided tour of horror cinema came about. And so, like I said, this first book of Blood, Sex, and Psychos, I decided to focus on kind of the genre that I feel like I have the most grasp on. I've really kind of had a bit of an obsession of, learning all the ins and outs of, and that being particularly the slasher genre, but also the spin-off from it, the torture genre.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And that's exactly the book that I want to talk to you about, is Blood, Sex, and Psycho, The Guide to Slasher and Torture Cinema. I've read this book, and I have to admit, and we're going to go over, I want your opinions on the chapters and the movies in the book, because you picked some really, I mean, how you laid this whole book out chronologically, and you split them up into two different chapters, one being slasher, one being torture, and how you picked them, was incredible. The detail and stuff that you go into them. So I'm really excited about this book. It's actually not a very long book for our readers out there. I encourage everybody to go and get it from Amazon. But the thing about the book is once you start reading it, you get into it. And like me, I'm a very visual person, so I started thinking about the movies again, and here I am just, I'm like, oh, let me go pull up this video clip of this movie, and I'd go to YouTube or somewhere on the web, and I'd pull up the trailer. I'd even pull up a trailer on a movie. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is so cool. I love this. And so it brought back reading this book. It brought back a lot of my favorite films that I've seen since I was a child, and and how you analyze the movies as well kind of makes you stop and think. You're like going, even from Michael Myers being 6, or the Last House on the Left is a movie we'll talk about, and different things. And I was just like, wow, this is pretty cool. But it's so easy to read and go through it. You could basically sit down in one reading and read this whole book once you get enthralled and entranced into it. If it wasn't for me going through and pulling up YouTube clips, but that's just me. What really reminded me, again, was the joy out of watching some of these movies. And I say joy in terms of horror or whatever, but, as an artist, as a director, as a writer, screenplay person, you want to have your audience get a joy out of it. Now, whether it's some sick, twisted, demented joy or whatever it is that they get out of watching movies, because I'm right there buying the tickets too, it's still good to watch. And I think people need adrenaline in their lives, and these movies bring adrenaline. It's hilarious because I started watching when I was a kid. I don't really get the chance to watch them too now because I have kids now. They're always watching Nickelodeon. And so if, Nickelodeon or the Disney Channel or something like that is not on TV, then I'm up late night trying to watch them or something else. But, in terms of Michael Myers, if you look at Michael Myers, I think he started, one of the bases of the plot was whenever he started when he was 6 years old. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I have a 6-year-old son. I don't want him to be the next Michael Myers. And the other part I really like about this book is the sense of humor you bring to it. You really bring a lightness to it in terms of the dark horror, attitude that your blood movies have, and it just makes you stop and think. You go, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. So it's hilarious. One of the first things I like to talk about here is your breakdown of the 7 deadly sins. And I never really thought about that because, the whole Brad Pitt movie, 7 out there where, they do, the guy repeats murders off of, the 7 sins. But you broke this down into lust, envy, greed, gluttony, pride, wrath, and sloth. So let's talk a little bit about those and why you chose to bring those into it.
Well, for me, the foundation of a slasher film isn't necessarily the guy with the knife. That's a huge part of it, but for me, the big part of it is that there are kind of these rules that are established for this specific genre. It can be argued that a lot of horror films follow these rules, but slasher films really stick to them, and that is that it's really the morally just character that survives. And they specifically target the 7 deadly sins as being kind of the ways of basically damning a character. And so, the obvious one that people have made fun of for years is the fact that unprotected sex or, premarital sex within a horror film will get the character killed. That's usually always the virgin's the one that lives. And so, that's definitely one of the big rules. But, it goes down to really all of them because, I lump up envy, greed, and gluttony in this book because, really, in the end, it comes down to individuals that care more about, possessions and money and so forth, instead of another person. And so, and really what it comes down to, is like the way I put it is, the reason these characters get killed is who the hell wants to see the schmuck survive? You know?
True.
It's the way I describe it's kind of morbid relief. You know, you can't have all the victims, you know, that you're feeling sorry for. You have to have at least one person that Jason or Michael takes out. You're kind of rooting for the killer, you know. And so it's a way of relieving tension in the film, while also again following the kind of rules handed down. And you know, it goes into pride, and also which you know, these are the kind of jerks of the film that, you know, and again, it's not just the fact that, again, you don't want to see the schmuck survive, but it's also that, you know, there has to really be one antagonist in a slasher film.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't really work with more than one, so that's why these characters get knocked off, you know. And, you know, Wrath, what that comes down to is the characters that are kind of rushing off in the battle. But again, that's not really a virtuous character. That's somebody else that's having bloodlust as well. And Sloth, again, it's one of the jokes of the genre, is that if it's not sex that the teenagers that can't push the liquor are doing, it's usually, you know, they're rolling up a joint or something, and usually that gets them killed as well. And so what it comes down to is really slasher films are the cautionary tales of today. You know, these are the campfire stories that we tell, you know. And the reason we tell campfire tales is to, you know, try and have a moral and try and get people to do the right things and all that. And, you know, it's a way of harkening back to that campfire setting. And so, you know, talk about them kind of almost, you know, despite how evil the characters are supposed to be, they almost act as the hand of God. You know, and that's really, again, where it harkens back to is those, you know, fables and so forth. And I think that, in my opinion at least, I think the slasher film is a direct line to those types of tales.
You know what, I have to agree. Once you start looking at the sins like that and the characters that are played in it, I could sit there and pick out the characters in my mind as you were talking. I'm like going, yep, there's that guy, there's that girl, yep, there's the wrath person that says, oh, I'm going to get this guy, and then winds up dying. There was one particular movie that the wrath person actually worked. I think it was Last House on the Left, but that was just so sick and twisted. It was unbelievable. There's no way that the parents, you know, I can completely see on how the parents could do that, because me as having children would feel the same exact way. And it's so interesting on you're talking about, you know, pride and envy, greed, and gluttony. Nobody wants to see the rich person who has money these days. It's hilarious. So let the rich person die. When we're talking about slasher films, we have to mention Wes Craven, because he's an awesome director. If you pull up his credit list, he's, you know, 29 directing series. I think he wrote like 24 screenwrites, you know, all kinds of other things. You're a huge fan of Wes Craven. Tell me a little bit about why you think he is the person that he is, and what's your favorite parts about him and what he does.
Well, obviously, you know, everybody has to kneel before his supreme beardedness.
Supreme beardedness?
The supreme beardedness, that's right.
Nice.
The guy's got a wicked beard. Yeah, I mean, for me, I became a Wes Craven fanboy just from, well, obviously the biggest part being my all-time favorite horror film, A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yep.
Which, I mean, that, for me, that, you know, when I was growing up, there was one name associated with, you know, ultimate fear, and that was Freddy Krueger.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it didn't get scarier than that.
One, two, Freddy's coming for you. Oh,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, you know, that movie was a big influence on me, and also just my taste in horror films. And it really just, I noticed that it's like Scream, which he directed, unfortunately didn't write, but, you know, that was a huge game changer in the horror genre. You know, and he's been involved with films like Swamp Thing even, and, you know, I mean, well, Swamp Thing was like a big blockbuster. For me, it was an important film. And so, I mean, like I said, for me, it's every film he's touched, I've enjoyed. And so, when I'm looking for a horror film, if it's got his name associated with it, you can count me in.
Okay, so let's pick out some of these movies. On the first chapter, it's knives, machetes, and chainsaws, the slasher films. And these, oh my goodness, as I started going down through the list that you covered, I was going, oh yeah, I remember this, and oh yeah, I remember that. Oh, that was good too. So, but your chronological order on this, you actually mentioned one that I hadn't seen yet, but I will because I found it on YouTube, and it's called Peeping Tom. And it came out in 1960. Can you tell me a little bit about that one and why you liked it, why you picked it?
Yeah, well, one question I get asked a lot is, what was the first slasher film? Because really there's no definitive line on it, as far as, yes, this is when they said the slasher genre started. It was an evolving process. It's, as with all with the subgenres before, there was, stage, different films that kind of changed the game. And, well, Psycho, traditionally gets credited as being the first slasher film.
Yeah.
I really don't agree. Because, this film came out 3 months prior to Psycho. And the reason that it doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't get the credit as being the first slasher film is because it was so majorly lampooned. And what it came down to is the director of this film, he was trying to make a realistic killer. This came out during a time when vampires, aliens, and, giant lizards were rampaging through cities, This wasn't during a time when you had the, people basically being the monsters. They were always otherworldly. They were never the guy next door. This was the film that really changed that. And, well, I mean, some people have argued the 1927's The Watcher by Alfred Hitchcock could constitute as a slasher film. The problem is it was based on a true story. And so it's not, it seems like for a true slasher film to happen, it's got to be original material. And so, again, for me, that's another plus column in Peeping Tom and a minus from Psycho, because technically Psycho is based on a real killer, which not many people know.
Yeah, and I just read that in the book, and I didn't realize that. So, that shocked me. I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah, there was a very disturbing guy by the name of Ed Gein, I believe that's how it's pronounced. And he, well, let's just say he took up sewing, let's say. And he had a lot of other issues, and that's where Norman Bates' persona came from. But getting back to Peeping Tom, the film, when it came out, it was released to critics first, which in retrospect was a huge mistake. Because this film had not only depicted a guy as a killer, it did so in a sympathetic manner. You had this guy being a victim of an extraordinarily disturbed father who abused him throughout his entire childhood and made him into the guy he is. And he ends up falling in love in the story, and you really kind of start rooting for him about halfway through it. This is something that Rob Zombie did later with Devil's Rejects, and, for somebody to attempt to do that in the 1960s, was unheard of. And, and talk about that, one of the stories goes that one of the women who was at one of the premieres of the film, who was also a critic, went up to the director afterwards and looked him in the eyes and said, don't ever do that again. So, I mean, the guy, the director of the film, he couldn't find work afterwards, and nobody in the UK would hire him. He was just blacklisted. Nobody would touch him. He ended up having to go to Australia to find work. And it wasn't until, I want to say like 20, 30 years later, that Martin Scorsese had discovered his film and decided that, this was a film that shaped him as a director, and he wanted the world to see it, so he ended up distributing it himself. And it was only then that people really started paying attention to it and giving it the credit that it deserved. So when I wrote this book, I wanted to make sure that I, shine the spotlight on Peeping Tom in particular, because for me, that's the film that launched the Psycho and Texas Chainsaw and all the slashers to come.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I've never seen it before. I'd never even heard of it until you mentioned it, and so then I go to look it up, and I'm like, oh, there's the whole movie right there. You can actually watch it on YouTube, and I plan on watching that on YouTube tonight or sometime this next week. And I started watching the first part of it, and I completely agree on what you're saying about this, your review and your association with the movie. I was like going, holy cow, that's amazing. And I'm sorry for the guy that get kicked out of the his country and he couldn't find work anymore. But whenever you have an audience member that comes up and says, don't you ever do that again, you did the right thing and you need to continue to do it. Because that's exactly what you want. You want people, that
have strong feelings.
Exactly. And that's one of the hardest things as a director. And I've done a couple of plays and things like that, and with an extra in a movie. And you always want, as an actor, you always want to stir emotion. You always want, as a director, you always want to stir emotion. If you can pull emotion from an audience member, then you've got them. And, for that audience member to come up and say, don't you ever do that again, he hit the nail on the head. He's just like, bam, and it's in there. It's in the wood. And that was just amazing. So, and as I was sitting there watching, I was going, holy cow, this is awesome. So unfortunately, it was probably a little bit ahead of its time. Unfortunately, 3 months ahead of its time before Psycho come out. And Psycho, I have to agree with you on this one as well. It's one of those movies, you start hearing the noise, and the music to all these movies are embedded in people's brains once you watch them. And Psycho, I think, is one of the best movies as well. So what's your opinion on Psycho?
Oh, I think it's a great film. I think that Alfred Hitchcock, you gotta give the guy credit for, learning from Powell's mistakes from Peeping Tom. And that, when he released the film, he knew he wasn't going to have the critics get anywhere near it before its release. And it paid off for him.
Yep.
It made up, one of the other things that I didn't mention in the book, but is Alfred Hitchcock, when he released Psycho, made a point of, you either are on time for this film or you're not getting in to see it. He had lines, going around the theater, and he made sure people got in when the film started. When the second it started, nobody would see it in there. He didn't want anybody coming in the middle of it. He didn't want people spoiling the ending. He didn't, he made sure it was under wraps on what this film was. He didn't want anybody telling anyone about it. And he went as far as he recorded messages over these to be played over loudspeakers saying, I understand this is a hassle, but I'm doing this because I'm your friend. And I want you to enjoy this movie the way you're supposed to. And, it was a smart way of marketing this film. And, there's just, if anything, it's maybe possibly even more bloody than Peeping Tom. Peeping Tom doesn't show a lick of blood. In the shower scene, there is some blood in Psycho. And, it's more brutal, but people enjoyed it. It did incredibly well. He became a major shareholder in Universal Studios because of it. And, Peeping Tom definitely started the genre. Psycho's the one that made it a moneymaker. So, I think it's a very important part of cinema history. And, it's one of those films that everybody has to have seen at least once.
I definitely agree. With talking about some of these old school movies, and I love going back and talking about these, but I do believe that they started, a set for moviegoers and directors on out. But there's one, The Last House on the Left, originally come out in, I think, 1972, and there was a remake that was just done in 2009. But I think the punchline of this movie is, to avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie, only a movie, only a movie. And I've never seen the 1972 version, and so I had to go back and look at that a little bit in the clip. What's your opinion on The Last House on the Left?
The original one, well, of course, is done by Wes Craven, who, of course, can do no wrong. It is immensely disturbing. It is definitely not a film that you can sit down and just expect to enjoy it. You know, it's extremely brutal, and it's meant to be. I mean, this film is, you know, I like to think of it as this is the artistic film of the torture genre. You know, it's the one that for me kickstarted the genre. But it's for me, artistic films are meant to make you feel a certain way, not necessarily entertain you. And I think that's what The Last House on the Left really does. It is, like I said, extraordinarily brutal. It's meant to be, and its undercore is really about the corruption of innocence. And you have to keep in mind, this film came out during just after Vietnam, when America had really kind of lost its innocence. And director Wes Craven wanted to reflect this. So what you have is, you know, this film that starts out with this wholesome family. You know, I talk about the father being almost like this Mr. Rogers type. And it's, you know, as soon as it's introduced to these psychos that are on the loose, you know, it suddenly takes a very dark turn. And it's very surreal in the middle parts of this film because it's interspliced between these brutal, you know, attacks by these guys on these two girls, and then it'll cut to her family setting up for a birthday party. It's like an episode of the Brady Bunch. And it's like, you know, it was done very well. It was extremely brutal. And like I said, that again, like Peeping Tom before it, you know, shook people to their core. So much so that supposedly the story goes that one screening, you know, they charged the projection booth so that way they get a hold of the film and burn it. You know, I'm not exactly sure, you know, if they're, you know, were picking the right films to burn, but, you know, it definitely had an impact on, you know, culturally and on films to come. And the remake I've seen, and I think the remake is good in its own way. It's not the original, definitely not. It's not near as dark, for one thing. I think, you know, if you want to watch Last House on the Left Light that wants the remake, you know, it's still a heavy R-rated film, but it's not. Last House, the original, is probably one of the most brutal horror films you'll ever see.
I think that just makes me want to go watch it more. Now, when we start talking about slasher movies, for some crazy reason, it becomes sequels. And there are some really great sequels out there. You know, the episodes, the series, you know, the multi-remakes of the new chapters. And I'm talking about, you know, the Texas Chainsaw Massacres, which I actually got a chance to meet Gunnar Hansen one time. He played Leatherface, and I got to help judge a costume contest with him. Very, very nice guy. Awesome guy. You know, when we talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Friday with Nightmare on Elm Street. What do you think that in terms of these movies that makes them so great for them to have repeat sequels like this? That, you know, each particular part of them that makes them what they are, and how do they help give to the horror slasher films for each section?
I think that the biggest part for them is the fact that they have iconic villains. You know, it comes back to this is the next generation that was spawned from when Universal had Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, you know, the Mummy, all of them. You know, they were in multiple films, and they became more of a legacy than anything else. And so when this, you know, slasher craze started in the late 70s, early 80s, you know, they were creating these iconic villains, and they were discovering that, you know, they could crank out these films, you know, a year apart from each other in some cases. And get them keep coming back for more. It was prime drive-in movie material, And so I think that the reason that they do so many sequels is, so they can have these iconic characters live on. And that's why today we're running into all these remakes, they're trying to bring them back again, which makes sense because Universal, it's the same thing that happened with them. They did tons of sequels, and then around the time they got to having Costello meet Frankenstein, they started slowing down to a stop. And then come, next, in 1950s, 1970s, they started relaunching it again with the Hammer horror films. And so, audiences were reintroduced to Dracula and Frankenstein and so forth. And I think what we're having now is the same thing. The sequels have kind of ground to a stop, and now we're kind of relaunching all these films again. That's why we're getting, Samuel Bayer's Nightmare on Elm Street, Rob Zombie's Halloween, and, it's, some people are, against the remakes because they don't want their, original films touched. And I can understand that. But in my opinion, it's the natural progression of things. These characters are much, become larger than life, much more larger than the creators of them. And so because of that, it's time for them to be handed down to the new generation. I think in some cases you're going to end up with, remakes that are good. I personally like Zombie's take on Halloween. It wasn't the original, but it shouldn't be. He needs to have his own version of it. Same goes for Nightmare on Elm Street. Again, I'm a Wes Craven fanboy, so you'd think it would be blasphemy to remake something of his, but I actually quite like Bayer's take on the Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm still getting used to Haley and the fedora of Freddy, but he did a decent job. It's a different take on him. But I think, you'll end up having, ones that work, and then you'll end up having ones that are complete crap, like the Black Christmas remake.
Agreed. You mentioned the iconic part of these movies, and as I mentioned out, and I believe our listeners will do the same thing. Our listeners will do the same thing. Is you mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you automatically think of Leatherface. You mentioned Halloween, and you think of Michael Myers, and you mentioned Friday, and you think of each of these, Jason and Nightmare and Freddy. What I really liked about your book as well is you broke down the characters, the iconic part of the characters, such as Leatherface or Halloween, on how Michael Myers started off being a 6-year-old boy, and that was one of the things. Like you pointed out in your book, you said, okay, well, we're all going to go down this wild, crazy, curvy road out in the middle of nowhere, like the Psycho movie did, and then the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is way out there in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden here's Halloween, and it's this little 6-year-old boy in suburbia, and and this stuff, and you start to think, and you point out very well in the book, you're like, maybe this could really happen. There really could be something like this that happened. And, I got to think about it, I was like going, holy cow, he's right. Some of these parts is really cool. So I really like how you broke them down. Can you talk a little bit about Freddy and how he come around? If people haven't, if ladies and gentlemen out there listening, if you have not seen some of these movies, you really need to read his book and go watch these movies. Even if you watch the YouTube clips, everything else, it's phenomenal, because if you just say the word Freddy, you start thinking of everything. But what was so great about Freddy? What do you think that made him who he was? And why did it change a little bit from, a typical slasher of a physical person?
Well, the biggest thing for Freddy Krueger that made him stand out was that he was basically a maverick of his time. The genre was dominated by these voiceless Goliaths of killers that, slowly lumbered after their victims. And there was the same, the masks changed, but it was basically the same killer film to film. And so when A Nightmare on Elm Street came out, they just completely went with the opposite. Freddy not only talked, he, would deliver one-liners. He was kind of this maniacal Joker-type figure. And they went away from these large, lumbering characters to Robert Englund, who's this very kind of slight, skinny toothpick of a man. He's very, almost like an Ichabod Crane type build about him. And, it was visually very striking and different. At the same time, it was just as horrifying. And definitely they went away from the mask that had, the burned face with a fedora and sweater, so that way it was, again, something different. It's not necessarily face or mask, like it was in other films that defined the character. It was the hat, the claw, the shirt. It was everything else. So, this was kind of a polar opposite character, and audiences dug it. It was, they definitely got into it. And kind of a side story, but the other thing that I thought when I was researching for this book was that A Nightmare on Elm Street began as a true story. And I thought that was just freaky as hell. It was, I think Wes Craven had read this article about a boy who said that something was after him, and he refused to go to sleep. His parents were worrying. They begged him to go to sleep. And he, was getting physically sick from not going to bed. And, for the life of him, they couldn't figure out why he was even staying, how he was able to stay awake. And so, finally, one day, he, eventually knocks out. He's fallen asleep at the table. And, in some stories I've heard, that supposedly they actually snuck him some sleeping pills. But, I wasn't able to verify that for sure. But, and nonetheless, they ended up, carrying him to his room, grateful he had finally gone to sleep. And then a few hours later, they hear this death-curdling scream. They go racing to his room, and, they find him dead. He had just shrieked and died.
Wow.
And, they discover, in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, they have Nancy with his coffee maker hidden in her closet. And it was with him, that's where it came from. As they discovered, he had been drinking coffee, he had been smuggling it into his room, trying to desperately stay awake. But then finally, he fell asleep, and something happened that got him, basically. And he wasn't the only case. There had been a phenomenon they called Asian death syndrome, because these were all individuals that were refugees from Vietnam that were having this happen to them. All were men. Most of them were in their late teens to early 20s, and for the life of them, to this day, they don't know what happened. They just fall asleep and wouldn't wake up, and all of them are reporting these horrific nightmares. So, Wes Craven saw this, and he thought, that makes a movie.
Well, see, that's kind of interesting, because I hardly ever sleep. For some reason, I just only sleep a couple hours a night or whatever. It's not that I purposely try to stay awake, but I do sometimes stay awake for, a couple of days on end, and I hope I just don't, Freddy doesn't come to get me, 1, 2, 3. I'm trying to think, maybe I should sleep more. Oh my goodness. With the slasher movies, just kind of rounding up the first chapter with the slasher type of genre, Scream. You talk about Scream in the movie. Now, I've seen the Scream series, and I think it's a good slasher movie, but why did you feel so important to put Scream amongst all these other great horror slasher movies of the time? Because it's kind of recent.
Yeah, and really because there were two kind of major surges in the slasher genre. Technically the film started in the 60s, but the first real surge of it came in 1978 with the release of Halloween. And then from there, everybody was doing it. And it died down around shortly after the release of Nightmare on Elm Street. That was kind of the tail end of it. So around 86, it was kind of pretty much done. And eventually, horror films started gaining popularity again in the early 90s, but mostly in the mid-90s. And, Silence of the Lambs, that was a big part in that. I don't really consider it a horror film, but studios definitely did, and they started reinvesting in the genre because of it. And Wes Craven, of course, was tapped again to, kind of bring back the genre. And he started thinking, this has been done before. People are in on a joke, and it's just we're going to run into the same problem unless we actually acknowledge it. And so, they ended up actually having a screenplay. I forget the name of the guy who actually wrote it off the top of my head, Williamson, I think. He, wrote this screenplay called Scary Movie, which was the idea of taking, these serial killers, and everybody's saying that, whenever there's a tragedy where somebody goes on a shooting spree or something, they say, well, that guy clearly has watched too many horror films. And so you say, well, what if I do that? What if I make a killer that has grown up watching Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, Leatherface, and so he concocted this plan of kind of doing this self-reflecting horror film, and so that's where Scream came from. And the success it had at the box office, again, it reignited the slasher genre. In the 90s, we had a whole new crop of slasher films popping up, from I Know What You Did Last Summer to Urban Legend, but the thing with this new crop of slasher films is they were all whodunits. That was kind of the new thing they wanted to have with it. They didn't want to have the same iconic character. They wanted to have these, a mask or a mantle of sorts for it. And so that's where this new crop came up. I don't think Scream, I thought, was excellent. I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend are okay. I don't think they measure up to the first wave slasher films. But, if you're documenting, the popularity of slasher genre, you can't deny, their importance.
Okay, I can see that because, Ghostface, just the idea of somebody putting on a mask, and if you look at some of these slasher people we have, that are Halloween costumes out there now, you look at, Jason, who has his mask, who is, I think, Captain Kirk, was a mask of Captain Kirk originally, and then you had,
Myers,
and then you have the hockey mask, and then all of a sudden now, you come out and there's this Ghostface, person, and who's wearing the mask now? So I completely see your point. I agree. Sorry about that. I'm not listening here. So I completely see your point, and I agree with that. Okay, now let's look into chapter 2. We talked about the slasher and that shiny knife that shines across the screen, and everybody knows it's coming because they just pulled it out of the butcher cabinet, and you got the music that's happening. Your next chapter, torture film. Just me starting to talk about is raising goosebumps up on my arms right now. What's the difference between torture and slasher? Why did you break those up?
Mainly because I think that, when they first started, there wasn't that much of a difference. But as time's gone by, it's really become its own beast, especially today. I think that as of right now, slasher films are kind of on the decline, and we have torture films that are kind of front and center right now, and that's largely due to Saw. But the main distinction that I see, at least, in these two films is, or these franchises really, is that that the slasher film is about a killer. It's about somebody who, their end goal is to kill people. They care about a body count. A slasher film, on the other hand, they are actually trying to kill people, at least, at their core. At its point, torture film is about inflicting pain. Death is an unfortunate side effect of it. Jigsaw sets up these games intending for people to survive.
About this? Am I
that's all right. No, it's for me at least, I think comedy and horror are very closely linked together. They elicit the same kind of shock response. You know, you're either going to laugh or you're going to scream. You know, and the slapstick is evidence of that, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for the torture genre, I mean, like I said, it started with Last House on the Left, which was kind of the prototype for torture films to come. I Spit on Your Grave, that followed soon after, was definitely kind of the, you know, blueprint for torture films to come. And it became really about revenge, or a very twisted sense of justice. And Jigsaw even has that. But that doesn't have to be the only approach to a torture film. Torture films can also have, you know, in the case of Pinhead, for example.
Yes, Hellraiser.
He's basically, Hellraiser. This is a case of it being about these demons or whatnot that are, you know, torturing people in hell, more or less. Just dragging people straight down. Yep, Cenobite. Which, for the life of me, I don't know, you know, how they decided that was a threatening name. Like I said, it sounds more like a breakfast pastry than anything else.
Well, it sounds like the Seven Deadly Sins, Cenobite.
Yeah.
Kind of like when I read it, it doesn't spell that way, but when I say it, it's like the sin, I'm like, and I look back at your review of the Seven Deadly Sins, I'm like going, oh, well, maybe that's why they picked that. So, and when you look at the different characters, they're kind of like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing is, I mean, the Cenobites are very much in the left quotient of the Seven Deadly Sins. You know, that's a franchise that's definitely steeped in S&M, and I imagine that the S&M, you know, type vibes started getting into the torture genre earlier than Hellraiser, but this was kind of the first film that really embraced it, you know. And they have, whether they were poking fun at it or actually just full on embracing, yes, this is what we're about, you know, that's debatable, but nonetheless, I mean, that definitely kind of firmly established another aspect of the torture genre. But lately, it hasn't been about either justice or, you know, demonic duty type things. The latest crop of torture films, they don't give a reason. It's just plain creepy. Human Centipede being an excellent example of that.
Yeah.
You got this mad scientist type guy who's throwing people together and doing it not for science, not for anything but his own joy. You know, we don't, other than that, we're not really given much of an explanation. It's just really this disturbing film that's brought before us. And another film, Hostel, does the same thing. And Hostel, you know, going full circle, it does what Peeping Tom did before it. It points the camera on the audience. You know, for Peeping Tom, it was about a guy making a film, you know, about killing people, which was kind of a way of saying filmmakers do that. And in the case of Hostel, it's these wealthy, you know, businessmen that are paying this group to capture people and then allow them to torture, maim, and kill them. You know, and so in that sense, it sheds a light on the audience, and that they're doing the same thing. They're buying tickets to watch people get tortured, you know?
Yeah.
And so
I think Hostel was one of the last movies of torture films that I actually saw when I first started watching the first one. And I literally sat there going, oh my God, I can't believe this. This is crazy. And I don't even think I finished watching it, but for one reason or another, I don't think I finished watching it because it was so crazy. But it reminded me of when I was in college, one of the psychology classes that I took, it talked about, there was this experiment by some psychologist that gave somebody a switch, like an electronic switch, and told them that if this switch right here, that it's a little rotating dial that you can turn up the amount of juice, and the electrodes are actually connected to another human being. You turn it up however much that you want, and knowing that the person that they were going to turn that dial to was going to get shot, they kept turning it up. They kept turning it up and torturing the people. And so just the psychology of the human mind, you know, plays so well into these movies that you're talking about, like Hostel and the Human Centipede, and Saw, you know, things like that. And it's like just torturing people. And it's like going, holy cow, you know, the human psyche is really like that. Not everybody per se, but, you know, there was a study done about that. And so Hostel was, you know, was just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, at least the ones recently of the torture genre really started, again, really offering a lot of self-reflection of, you know, the audience and human nature in general. And, you know, the thing I've come across time and again is sometimes, you know, the truth is way scarier than fiction. Yeah,
exactly. And whenever they mix the two together and you find out that, oh, wait a minute, this is based on a true story, or this, you know, like I was talking about earlier with Michael Myers, you know, being so young, you know, this could happen, a kid could snap, you know, people love to torture people. We, as audience members, go to watch things like this. You know, even if you just look at, like, I'm a martial artist. You take ultimate ultimate cage fighting, or whatever else. We go and watch these bloody, violent things, and it's been down in the history of gladiators and everything else. You know, people go watch these blood-ordering, you know, fight scenes that happen. And the same thing with torturing. And I think that's what kind of gets me, is because I'm sitting there going, wow, you know, this really gets into my own personal thought, and I'm going, people could possibly do that. So it's so interesting on how you put the two together. And I never saw The Human Centipede. And that's another great thing about this book. People, if you haven't seen these movies, you'll definitely want to go see them after he talks about them. But I never saw The Human Centipede, so I went to YouTube. I watched the trailer on it, and I was sitting there going, no way, nobody could be that sick. And you know, it's just interesting on what the movie's about. So I mean, you do a heck of a cover of, you know, between the slasher and the torture films, and I guess that's when I really get into the torture films, and I really start thinking about it. I'm like, ooh, that's deep. You know, you're right about a lot of things on here. I mean, I was sitting there going, oh wow, yep, mark this down, mark that one down, mark that one down. So, and even if you look at Hellraiser, and I was talking about the sequels prior in the slasher series, you know, Hellraiser, didn't it have a couple of extra series as well? Wasn't it like Hellraiser 2, like Hellbound?
Oh yeah, they were together.
Hostels like that. And so, do you think it's the same thing that, like what we were talking about with the slasher films, do you think it's the same thing, a reason why these movies have a sequel to it is because of, and one thing I liked about the Saw, it wasn't always the same people, right? So it was, the guy kept redoing it, and you know, kept torturing other people to show them about what life is about and what they're missing. You know, so do you think that's really what kicked it on, as in terms of allowing these movies to be repeated like that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, again, the torture genre is definitely a spinoff from the slasher genre. It's a continuation of it, and all roots back to beginnings of horror with, you know, the first talkies of done by Universal, you know, and you know, the idea of having an iconic villain that comes back time and again, you know, is kind of a staple for the horror genre. You know, that's what keeps people coming back for more. You know, and so, I mean, when you have characters like Pinhead for Hellraiser and Jigsaw, you know, it helps identify it. You know, Hostel, the next one film, they don't quite have that iconic character, though.
Right.
I do know they are doing a third, but it will be a direct-to-DVD sequel. So we'll see how it comes out. You know, I'll definitely see it, but I'm not having the highest hopes that one's going to be able to sustain itself.
Okay. So if you were to give it a thumbs up, thumbs down, would it be one up, one down?
For Hostel?
Yeah.
Hostel, the first one is 2 thumbs up. I think the sequel to it is 1.
Okay. Fair.
Only because the sequel, they kind of start, and what made the first one great is it was against the cliches. You know, it went so far as to even make sure that the victims in this were guys. You know, it wasn't a group of girls that were getting tormented by guys. It was a group of guys that ended up getting seduced and captured by women. And so, with the sequel, they decided to go back with the cliche as a group of girls. So for me, that was kind of a step backwards. And I mean, what I appreciate about the sequel is all the questions you had from the original and answers. And actually, a good chunk of Hostel Part 2 is from the point of view of the people that did and do the torturing. And so you're really given a different view at the whole thing. So for that reason, I still give it a thumbs up. Like I said, the third one, and the fact that Eli Roth is no longer involved with the series, for me, that's a major downside. And so, I mean, I don't want to damn a film before I've seen it, but I'm not overly enthusiastic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely understand your input on it, and just from looking at, that's the reason why I asked you, if you haven't seen it yet, it's hard to give a thumbs up, thumbs down, but if you look at the amount of research that you did on this book, and the amount of movies that you covered, and everything else that you do, you know, you're a horror movie expertise to me. You know, you should have a PhD from some university out there, you know, talking about the amount of movies you have. And how, besides actually sitting down and watching every movie like this and over the years, how long did it take you to put together the information on this book?
From start to finish, working on it every day, it took me about 2 months.
Okay. Well, it
started
right off the tip of your tongue then on some of the stuff. Because
a lot of the stuff is, a big part of this is, you know, I have that show, Midnight Spook Show, and so I'm, you know, on a weekly basis, I'm talking about the horror genre. And so this was kind of me trying to organize all that, you know, instead of just bits and pieces of random stuff here and there. I wanted to really focus in and organize it. And like I said, the game plan with this is, you know, I was originally going to write like a complete start to finish, you know, history of the horror genre, but I started doing the math on it. It's like, it was going to end up being like over 700 pages, and I was like, you know, I don't know if too many people are going to want to, you know, sit down and read something like that. So I decided to start dividing it up, and so that's why, like in this case, I've done, you know, one, you know, kind of short form novel that's about, it's about 18,000 words, which is the equivalent of about 64 pages, give or take.
Right.
And, you know, I'm going to release this one now. My plan is, you know, now I've done this, I'm going to go back and explore the origins of the horror genre. I'm going to do, the next one's going to be the rise of horror cinema. And it's going to talk about the silent films, the universal hammer horror, and even kind of talk about some of the literary, you know, authors like H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, the ones that, you know, set the groundwork for the films to come.
Right.
And so that's what the next one's going to be. Yeah, it's
very nice, very fitting.
Yeah, I'm planning on releasing. I think I have like an outline for 29 different short novels. Each one covering a different subgenre of the horror film. Very cool.
I like that idea. Now, where can people buy the book? Is it on Amazon?
It's since this is a ebook only series until the complete tune will be released in, you know, some years to come. It's available for the Amazon Kindle, and by the time this episode's out, it should be out for the Nook.
For the Nook as well? Okay. The Blood Sex Psychos.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's also just $1.99. So.
That's, you know, I have a ton of books. I'm sitting here in my studio now in my library collection and everything else. I've got a ton of books, and $1.99 is very, very affordable. And it's so great because, you know, with the technology today, people can put it on their Kindle, put it on their Nook, download it to their iPhone, something like that, you know, because of apps, and just read it whenever and wherever that they go. And you know, whether they're sitting out at the beach or in their backyard, or if they're, you know, reading it with the lights off, you know, the covers over their head with the flashlight, like I used to do as a kid. And, you know, I probably still will love doing that too, reading a good horror book. But, you know, turn off the lights, turn up the sound, like you always say. I think that's awesome. So $1.99 is an awesome price. People need to go out there and get this book, Blood Sex Psychos. It's, again, what amazed me, it wasn't a very long book, and I love the fact that you kept it short because it's a good read. But once you get enhanced into it, once you get into it, enthralled, then you're in it. and you're just like visual stimulus, and everything else is just popping and flowing, and your memory starts kicking back about the movies and everything else. You know, going, wow. Next thing you know, if you're not looking at YouTube, you've read the book, and you're going, that was awesome. You know, that was really cool. So, yeah,
Okay.
I liked it. Now, Midnight Spook Show, you have where it's on spookshow.tv. You have episodes and podcasts covering movies and things. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, basically, Midnight Spook Show is, I like to call it the online, your online source for all the horror news, reviews, and interviews that you can scream at. It's, primarily we do video and audio, but, it's primarily an audio show. It's on weekly. It's a live show on Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, and I should, tonight, actually. So, well, I'm not sure when this episode comes out, but, like I said, it's every Wednesday. I have, myself, my co-host, Tim Kretschmann. We talk about the latest, horror news. We have a segment called What You've Been Watching. We talk about the latest films we've seen. We give them a review. We'll either, talk about great films that we enjoyed, or we'll end up tearing one apart. Currently, the film that I consider the worst horror film I've seen thus far, that Tim keeps taunting me with, is a film called Thanksgiving, which is about a killer turkey, which happens to be played by a rubber puppet. So, Tim's our sound guy. He makes a point of having a gobble sound effect come up every now and then to distract me. Yeah, I mean, like I said, we have geek fights, you name it, and we'll talk about the latest horror news, the latest horror trailers. We've got a Facebook group associated with it, and we post trailers on there. And I went to the what convention was it now? The Days of the Dead convention. I did coverage from there. Interviewed quite a few celebrities, which was great fun. A lot of times I like to have some special guests on the live show or pre-recorded special editions of the show. And in fact, coming up in September, I'm going to be interviewing none other than Jason Voorhees himself, Kane Hodder.
Oh, Kane, yes. Kane Hodder. Very cool. I saw him here in Alabama. Got a chance to talk to him. He's a really nice guy, too. Huge. Really big guy. So, you also have the Moth Pod, and what are some other new things that you have coming up?
Well, yeah, my flagship show, the one that started it all for me in new media, was the Moth Pod, and I still got it up and running. It's got its 5-year anniversary coming up. It's a indie music podcast. I scour the web and the globe for the best in independent music, and I present a 12-track sampler every single week over at mothpod.com. I'm going to be returning to the hosting chair, actually. I took some time off, and I'm going to be hosting some of the episodes. I've still got other hosts on there as well. We've got Webster DJ, he's an awesome DJ from Australia, and Angie B, she's in a band called Blood Spiral. She has her own show called The Chillcast, and about once a month she comes in to host a special kind of laid-back, chill edition of the Moth Pod. And so, again, it's at mothpod.com. And my original book is Dark Worlds Project 31. It's the first one I wrote. It's a horror novel. It's, well, I know, far stretch for me, right? But it's, I would say the biggest influence for me on that is being a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and shows like Supernatural. And more particularly, even the Twilight Zone. I wanted to make sure that it was kind of these self-contained chapters that were linked together, so it's kind of like reading a TV series. And so it's kind of this overall mystery in the first book of what is Project 31. And it's, again, if you like my writing in Blood, Sex, and Psychos, you'll definitely dig Project 31, because I not only like to write, horrific stuff, I like to, sprinkle it with humor as well. I think the two go together really well, and I try to do that in all my writing.
Yeah. And it works well. I like it.
Oh, thanks. And the second book in that series, I'm hard at work on. Hopefully by the end of the year, early next year, it'll be coming out. That's Dark Worlds, The Gate. And like I said, this whole thing's part of a Dark Worlds trilogy. And we're working on possibly, or definitely actually, doing a short film based on one of the chapters in Dark Worlds Project 31. The success of that will determine if it continues on. It's kind of like a pilot episode. So if folks like it and they spread the word and, actually, buy a copy of the DVD and so forth, then there's going to be more in the series. And, that's pretty much, that keeps me busy.
Yeah, now, my question is, do you sleep? Are you going to have the Asian death syndrome thing? Because you're a pretty busy guy. So you have your website, ZackDaggy.com, just to cover it for a couple of people. You're on Facebook, under Facebook.com, front side, Zack.Daggy. There's a Dark World trilogy for the book, and I would love to have you back on our show to talk about that book as well in the very, very near future. You have mothpod.com that's going on. You've got the Spook Show TV.
SpookShow.tv.
Now, if people want to get involved or, to help you and give you some information and everything else, is this where they need to go? How can people contact you? How can they get involved to help you out? Is there some emails that you don't mind giving out?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, there's ZackDaggy.com. That's got all the info about me, including email and phone and all that. But as far as the best way to reach me, as far as email goes, Zack at mothpod.com is probably the best to go. Mothpod's kind of my production company also. So that's my main hub email. You can Facebook, I'm on there all the time. Twitter as well. I'm twitter.com/mothman. So yeah, I mean, it's if you're on the web, you can reach me.
Very cool. Okay, anything else you would like to add for our listeners out there who's going to become awesome fans of the Mothman himself? So anything else you want to throw out at us to scare us?
Basically, I guess I do this for the fans out there. This is a labor of love, and I'm like I said, I'm selling for $2. It's not much, but the more sales I have on this book, the more I can reinvest in publishing other works. Maybe getting a larger print edition out in the future, because it's I do this also for the fans, but also it costs money to produce this stuff. And so, any little bit helps as far as supporting it, and I appreciate that. And, tell your friends about it. I'm a big supporter of new media and social networking, so friend me up on there. I write back to everybody. And, SpookShow.tv, check us out every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Pacific.
Very cool. Everybody definitely go to Amazon.com, download this book on your Kindle or your Nook. It's Blood, Sex, and Psychos, A Guide to Slasher and Torture Cinema. And we're going to have Mr. Zack Daggy, the Mothman, back on our show to talk about his other book as well and all the new projects that he has going on. Check out his websites, his Facebooks, email him. Heck, donate him some money if you want. Download his book, buy it, whatever you want in order to help him out. He's got a lot of things going on. A very, very talented guy, and I'm so glad to get to talk to you. And your cat series phrase that you have before we sign off, what is that?
Yes, whenever watching great horror films, be sure to turn it up and turn up the lights. Cheers.
That's awesome. Thanks, Zack. I really appreciate it. You have an awesome, awesome spooky night.
Thanks. You too.
This is Girl in the Middle with Everybody's Baby.
They see how you shine, and no one but me knows you've been crying. You're loud and you're laughing, flirtatious and sly, and no one but me knows it's a lie. You're everybody's baby.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
At Taylor Gifts, we do customized monogramming and embroidery. We can monogram anything from a simple one name on a bib for a baby to a customized logo on a company shirt. We can make gifts for your wedding entourage and gifts for your friends. Label your children's items for school and put names on jerseys for sports. If you have items of your own you want them monogrammed and embroidered, we can do that. Tailor Gifts are sewn with high-quality thread on a professional embroidery machine. So go to the website www.tailorgifts.net, call 251-391-4354, email sales@tailorgifts.net, visit us at ETSY, and Facebook us. We are ready for your orders. The Ghost Tales Television Network, GTN. GTN is designed to give the paranormal TV and filmmaking community the opportunity to showcase their talents and creations. If you believe you have what it takes to create your very own TV show and or short film and you would like the opportunity to showcase your creations, you may contact us at ghosttellstv@gmail.com or call 901-377-7166 for more details. Make sure you visit ghosttellstv.com. GTN, America's Paranormal Superstation. Creatology is a comprehensive personal development course that will help you find your true power and your true beliefs. As a result, you will be able to realize the reality that you desire. The time has come to gain power and create the life that you are meant to live. Visit creatology.com today or call toll-free 877-248-8508 and get started in living life to the fullest.
Thank you for listening to the Friday edition of the Bradshaw Chronicles. I am your host, Bryan Lee Whatley, and I hope you have an amazing weekend. I look forward to seeing you next Friday.